Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to start off our webinar year strong with Bev Kay and Julie Winkle-Giulioni. Hi, Bev. Hi, Julie. How are you today?
Hey, Becky. Great. Thank you.
We're so thrilled to have all of you joining us. And as you're coming online, we hope that you'll take some time to get acquainted with the Zoom technology. Throughout today's event, we will welcome your comments and questions in the chat. So I would love it if you would take a moment to find the chat and go ahead, and when you get to the chat, use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. That way everyone who's on the call can see your comments and questions. And why don't you go ahead and give a shout out to whatever location you're calling in from today. We always love to know where you are. And if you happen to be calling in from an organization where you're joining with others to learn today, go ahead and tell us the name of that organization. And boy, these locations are fast and furious. I see lots of US locations: Delaware, Chicago, Carlsbad, California, Denver, Indianapolis, New York City, Aurora, Illinois, maybe New England. We've got a Canadian caller, more in Texas, one from Sweden, someone in Warsaw, Poland. Welcome, Jeff, in Arizona, Wyoming, the UK, more Canada. Wow. So many of you calling in from so many locations, and we are thrilled to have you. Again, we would welcome everyone as you're coming on this afternoon, and I see that many are still entering the room. Go ahead and make sure you select the drop down to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your comments. And we are thrilled that you are choosing to invest an hour of your time learning and growing with us. So a couple of key considerations for today's call. Not sure how someone else called in on Bev's link. We'll figure that out. But a couple of key considerations for today's call. We are recording today's session. So in the event that there's someone you know who might like to participate later, you will be free to share this with others, and we would invite you to do that moving forward. So we are recording today's session. We're also broadcasting live on Facebook, and we will welcome you throughout today's event to go ahead and put your questions and comments in the chat, and we would love to communicate with you in the future. So before we go any further, I want to take a moment to introduce Bev and Julie and set the stage for today's conversation. I would say that you know, I have known both of these ladies for such a long time, so it feels a little bit funny to be reading a formal bio. But both of them are authors of a wildly successful book called Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, which is now in its second and updated edition. But I'll tell you just briefly about each of these amazing thought leaders. Julie is an author, a speaker, and a consultant, and she helps organizations demystify what it means to become a great people leader. Julie's also been named one of Inc. magazine's top 100 leadership speakers. And in the time I've known Julie, I found her to be such a supportive person in helping me to become the best that I can. And I'm grateful for having a chance to know you, Julie. And Bev, same for you. You know, Bev has written, I don't even know how many books. Is it a dozen?
Under that.
Under a dozen. Okay, up is not the only way. And she's been working and researching in these areas of career development and retention for decades, helping others make more meaning of their work in the world. And we're so thrilled to have this chance today to talk with Julie and Bev about the modern IDP, individual development planning. And we're going to ask a question of all of you in just a few moments. But before we do that, we do have an overview of the content that we hope to share today. Kelly, if you can put that slide back up. And we'll take a look at that. While we're waiting for that next slide to come back up, thank you. So we have a question, and we would love to see your comments in the chat. And the question is, back for one sec to the first slide, Kelly, if you don't mind. What is the IDP's reputation in your organization? So if you could take a moment, make sure you've selected all panelists and attendees, and tell us a little bit, a few words or a sentence. What is the reputation of individual development planning in your organization? And I'd be happy to share some of your comments. So I'm seeing not normally used, not well understood or valued, checkbox activity, a pain, non-existent, a new concept, a waste of time, optional, pain in the neck and career tool at the same time, done but not embraced, a way to guide your career, considered a bit of a chore by managers and employees, mixed and a mystery. Thanks to all of you who are sharing your thoughts, and they're coming so fast. So Erin says that as an external executive coach, I use it with every client, and each has a different organizational relationship with it. Not very popular to most employees. So before we give everyone an overview of today's conversation, Julie and Bev, how are these responses resonating with you?
Well, it's clear we're in the right place this morning, huh? We need to talk about this topic.
Right. And I am saddened, of course, by that, but absolutely not surprised. It's a shame because it's a great tool, and we'll be talking about that. But thank you for being so honest.
Yeah, and so many people are sharing their thoughts, and as I said, those responses were coming in so quickly, but some common threads that we're seeing. So before we dive into the meat of our conversation, if we can go to the next slide, Kelly, we want to give you an overview that we're going to be talking today about why IDPs are important and how they're working out and what a better way forward might be. So, so glad that you've invested time with us. So as we dive in, let's address this question of why IDPs are important. I know that they've been around a while and are a pretty standard feature in most organizations, as some of these comments are showing us. Perhaps we can start with this question of why were IDPs originally introduced? Looks like I have a mix-up on my sheet there. Why were they originally introduced?
You know, the reason they were introduced is really a good one. It was to force managers and their employees to talk about what's next, to talk about growth. And I actually did some research, and they started in the 1950s, which is a long time ago. And they emerged like as an HR staple. They were attached to the performance appraisal, and sometimes done with performance appraisal and sometimes separated from it. You know, I remember years ago, I wrote an article titled Performance Appraisal and Career Development, a Shotgun Marriage. And it was about how they had to support one another. And then when I was asked to write another article about that topic, I wrote one that was called Performance Appraisal and Career Development Takes Two to Tango. And that meant do them any way you want to do them. They don't have to be married, just dance together. So, and let me apologize for my voice. I have that awful cold that's going around.
Well, I'm glad you made it. I'm glad you made it, Bev. Julie, do you have anything to add about why IDPs were originally introduced?
Yeah. As Bev said, I mean, they were really well-intentioned structures to make sure that at least once a year, everybody got a little bit of career development attention. And as Bev said, you know, sometimes they're married, sometimes they're separate. It's been interesting to watch, though, over the years and see how increasingly as they're married, how the performance dimension of the conversation takes the foreground, and the development frequently feels like a weird little PS that's added at the end that, you know, we got to get through this. Let's quick, you know, make this happen too. And so things have kind of morphed a little from the good intentions that got us started.
Right. And many organizations put out a banner, time to do it, time to do it. And when it was done, not everybody actually followed through.
Well, I was wondering about that as I heard you talking, because, you know, managing people myself, I see how you might have the best intentions around someone's career development, but then you get caught back up in the busyness of day-to-day work. Right. And I am seeing from the comments, Cheryl says that's the case at her company.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the values and benefits that IDPs offer. Julie?
So, when you strip it back, this kind of a career conversation is probably the most intimate and personal way that leaders get to interact with their employees. I mean, we're talking about people's goals and dreams and futures, and it's really meaningful stuff, that we share, leaders and employees together. And it's interesting, some research I had done last year across the generations, what I found was that employees, regardless of age, they expect their leaders to drive their development. They expect, they see as a number one top priority of their managers and leaders to support them in their career development. So it's pretty fundamental. And when you look at development in general, I mean, and Bev, you've been in this world for so long, you've seen the sustained focus on this. It's consistently among the top drivers of engagement, of discretionary effort. We know that whether people get great development or not determines whether they're going to come to a company, stay with a company, leave a company. And there's even research that suggests that when career development and solid individual development planning is in place, those employees who enjoy that actually bring more to the table. They're able to perform better than those that don't.
Absolutely.
So I've kind of come to think of the IDP and career development in general as almost a Swiss Army knife for leaders. It's one thing that we bring to the table and we do that accomplishes so many different jobs.
Right. And, it's a great idea to come together and be, and it be enforced. So I know I'm going to have at least one conversation with my manager. And I've been interested in watching what's happened on the performance side, that many organizations have booted it out. And I'm not sure what they've all done with the career conversation. Although Julie and I both know the desperate desire for that conversation is hotter than ever. And everyone, I'm sure, out there has seen the research that people leave organizations if they can't see a future for themselves. So it's become more and more important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That resonates with me, that people are desperately hungry to have someone take a special interest, and likely that they feel valued when we invest that time to listen to them talk about where they'd like their career to go.
Right.
There are quite a few questions in the chat related to the research. And one person is asking what the research is that says that career development drives an employee's longevity at a company. So potentially, if you have anything to share now, or we could get back to this individual in the follow-up. Any thoughts immediately, Julie? I see you nodding.
Oh, I was just suggesting that we might want to provide some links following up on this that speak to some of those studies.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like every single study I read from the major big organizations, the Gallups, the Mercers, all of them, when they look at why people leave and they get under it, it is to a great degree around, I don't see the opportunity here. So I'm going to look elsewhere. And often elsewhere is AstroTurf. The grass isn't always greener. But it's, I don't feel I'm being developed, when often development is right in front of their eyes and no one names it or calls it out. So definitely we can send you the research.
And I think it's worth noting, at least for a moment, the flip side of it. So certainly career development, robust individual development planning processes will help people stay longer. But the reality is that the average tenure now is about, 4.8 years. And so we aren't guaranteed, it's not the old cradle to grave career environment that we used to have. And so leaders need to understand that they might have a shorter period of time with folks. And yet, if we invest in their development, that time will make them better contributors, able to do more, bring more to the job as well. So, you know, some of it is building longevity, but the reality is we're going to see people leave. And when we develop them, we make the most of that experience that we have with them.
Well, from my personal experience, what's amazing is when people boomerang back, which is another trend that some organizations are seeing.
Yeah, yeah. When they ask for
And
it, it's not there.
we've been talking about the need for elegant exits and respectful returns, because many times at that last ditch when I'm saying I'm leaving, how do you deal with it? Can you turn it around? Can you make it an elegant exit? And when the person comes back, how do you make it a respectful return? And I think that's crucial. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Sure. Well, so let's transition a little bit. We talked about why IDPs are so important, and from the activity in the chat, I know that this topic is really resonating with folks. But let's talk about how this is all working out for organizations. We all know that there are extraordinary benefits to doing IDPs, but yet in many organizations, we're not getting the return from that process that we'd like to, or we're not seeing it live up to its potential. So let's talk about what is getting in the way of IDPs delivering on their promises.
Everything, I'd say. The biggest thing I'll bet is time. I don't have the time to sit down in a one-on-one conversation with all my direct reports and talk about that subject. And Julie and I, in Help Them Grow, talk about finding moments of time, maybe a minute or two here and there, to talk about career and to notice who's not happy doing what they're doing and who is. So I think that's a shame. And the other thing is sometimes managers aren't prepared for it. They're not trained. And there's a lot of different training programs out there. Julie and I do that. And if a manager feels uneasy about that conversation, they'll put it off. And the same is true for the individual. We all say you own your own career, but are we telling them and teaching them how to own their own career? My voice sounds terrible.
Let me jump in. I can piggyback on some of what you were saying, Bev. So, and also just drawing forward our opening chat, many of you use the expression non-existent. And I think that's what, as I work with organizations, I hear so frequently from employees. It's, the big thing that's getting in the way is it's just not happening. As I've said, managers have trouble finding the time. The other one is that folks are going through the motions. And I think it's Manfred had made some notes about career development or individual development planning being fundamental to engaging people. And it doesn't engage them when an employee knows that you're just doing this so you can check the box, meet the deadline, handle your responsibility perfunctorily. Manfred, I think, also asked a question about, is there any research about those sort of perfunctory IDP experiences? I haven't seen that research, but I think intuitively all of us know what the impact of that is. It sends a very clear "you don't matter" signal to the employee. A couple of other things that I think are getting in the way is the administrative burden. Again, in many cases, human resources department, with the best of intentions, have created the systems to make sure this happens. And yet sometimes, when we were interviewing for the book, we had managers saying, I don't have time to talk to my people because I got all this form stuff to do. Mm-hmm. And the forms, are in the foreground, and they tend to eclipse what really is the development part and the conversation part. And then I think the other thing, and I know this, I had a great boss growing up, and she was wonderful in so many ways. But every year we would sit down and we would create my annual individual development plan, and we'd tuck it all, button it down, tuck it away, and then the next year we'd pull it out and dust it off and start all over again. And that moment in time, not taking it forward, not doing anything with it, not using it as a tool to keep people engaged and interested in moving forward on their commitments, is a huge miss in many organizations.
I'd add to that, Julie, that that I think I'm losing my that I think that managers think everyone who comes in to sit down with me is going to want to talk about upward mobility. So, and I don't have enough upward mobility offers to make. So I'm going to just try to put it off, or I'm going to try to skirt those issues. When really what Julie and I are saying is that growth in the current job really is what the IDP can be about, as well as growth for that next step. And managers need to know how to talk about growth on the current job. And I think there's many ways to teach them that.
So I'm seeing a lot of comments related to the question of what's the frequency with which we should be returning to these conversations. So Julie, you reference, putting the IDP in a drawer, dusting it off each year. In an ideal world, how often would we be having these development conversations with our people?
So, the individual development planning meeting might be a once or a twice or a 4 times a year sort of meeting where you're really sitting down and doing some robust planning. But that in and of itself isn't going to ensure development. Again, those are still moments in time. I think what Bev and I would suggest is that development becomes part of the relationship that we have with folks, that it is something that we infuse into all the conversations that we're having. That when we're walking down the hallway and we meet up with somebody on the way to get a cup of coffee, rather than talking about the basketball game or, the weather, that it's a quick conversation about, what are the couple of things that you're learning most through this project? How could I benefit from what you're learning? Or, the normal things that you do, you launch a project together with a team, going around the room and having each person share what their developmental intentions are for that particular project. So it's a matter of rethinking all of the conversations that we're having and just stealthily slipping in a couple of questions that change the conversation and keep development and growth front of mind every day, not just that one day that we're doing the IDP.
So here's another example. Someone turns in a report that's been due. Manager receives the report, says, nice work, here's the next one. Instead of just taking a minute to say, well, which part of this report are you most glad is out of your way? Or which part was the hardest for you? Or which part did you most dislike doing, or the flip side? And that could be a 1-minute conversation. And what's interesting, if the individual can't answer, I promise you, they will go home and think about it. And if they can, I get a clue. And there's so many clues that are given every single day. I, as a manager, get a clue. I never realized she didn't like that part. I could easily give the slides to somebody else who loves doing that part. So I think the clues are out there if we capture them and bring them in. And then I saw Manfred said, what gets measured gets done. And the sad thing is holding people accountable. Did you do the IDP? Let me see how you did it. Only one organization in all my years had someone specific who read in division all of the IDPs. and got back to the manager and back to the employee. And I applaud that organization for having another pair of eyeballs on it.
And Manfred clarified that Peter Drucker was responsible for that quote. So that was generous with you, Manfred. And, you know, it really does boil down to what are we measuring? Are we measuring complying with the system and getting the paperwork in on time? Or as Bev said, are we measuring the quality? I think it was Jay who wrote something a little earlier in the chat about, you know, what if we measured managers for the actual success of their employees, the extent to which they were taking the action and engaging in the growth and reaching those milestones. And that would be really powerful and send a strong message.
Right. And maybe asking the individual, your IDP, I'm going to give you specific time for your IDP. What specific questions do you have that you would like me to be ready to answer? I think involving the individual more shows that you take responsibility, not just me. You know, don't come in and say, do me, show me, tell me. Come in and let me know what you're loving about your current job and not. So that would help.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure for folks on the call if you're listening from the manager's point of view or from the individual career development point of view. I'm a little bit curious about that. If you want to take a moment and tell me in the chat, you know, are you listening to this content today from the perspective of a leader or as an individual contributor? I'm seeing some boths. I know that what I was struck with in listening to the two of you is the high level of focus and intentionality that you have to have as a leader if you're going to enter the workplace each day thinking about really capturing those opportunities to have those development conversations, you know, when the easier route might be just to, you know, talk about the weather as you've referenced. But, you know, what type of extreme focus and intentionality does a leader need to bring to be able to pick up on those opportunities to talk about learning and growth day to day?
You know, again, going back to years ago, I wrote an article about on-the-spot career development. And it was 3 words I used. You have to recognize, you have to verbalize, and you have to mobilize. You have to notice an individual having trouble or loving what they're doing. Notice it, recognize, verbalize. I noticed how excited you were when you presented the Humma Humma report. and that recognize, and what about it was so exciting for you? And then mobilize is, well, what can we do to give you more of those experiences? And maybe it's just keying into recognize, verbalize, mobilize. That will help individuals move into action faster.
Well, one other thought, Becky, in relationship to your mentioning that it takes tremendous focus and intentionality. Everything does when we start doing it. Any new behavior or skill or capability requires that kind of attention and intentionality at the beginning. And if, as leaders, we can sustain that long enough to where it becomes a habit, then it's just how we show up. It's how we interact with people, and it's the absolute lens through which we see everything going on. And at that point, then you've got a leader who is creating a learning environment for their folks.
That's a really good point, Julie. Thank you for that reminder. So let's talk a bit about the way forward. So you've each made a compelling case that there is something different that we can be doing to develop people in our organizations. And I'm curious what it is that we can be doing differently. So let's talk for a moment. What have you found to be non-negotiable when it comes to creating an effective IDP approach for an organization?
You know, I'd say accountability might be right up there. I think from the top down, senior leaders need to do it and model it and show managers that report to them how it's done. Julie and I wrote a whole book, really Help Them Grow, is all about, in a way, the IDP. how do you have a conversation about my growth and my next steps? And if there's no accountability, it's really hard. You know, when, Julie, I don't know if you remember this, when we were first playing with this, we were trying to think of other words for IDP. And on the sad side, it was ignore development potential. On the sad side, it was impede development and progress. On the good side, it was ideate development prescriptions or invent development possibilities. And taking those three letters, IDP, and showing the difference in one side and the other, maybe that helps change the mindset coming in. And I also don't think companies market the IDP enough. Say that the conversation is expected and it's out there. So maybe it needs its own marketing as well as a formal conversation. And just lastly, as performance appraisal changed from once a year to many times a year, development should follow that route many, many, many times a year. Those are just a few ideas. I know you have more, Julie.
Yeah, and just building on that, you know, I think that it takes, if we're going to get this right, it takes a different mindset and an evolving skill set. So from a mindset standpoint, you know, we really do, and so many of you in chat have mentioned this, we really need to shift ownership. The employee needs to be taking the lead and taking ownership of the development process. And so that mind shift is critical. You know, another, it has to do with information and transparency. In organizations that do this well, people have access to information about what's going on in the organization, what's going on in the industry, what are the needs of the business, so that they can align their developmental direction in a way that's going to support the organization. And I think we've got to also have that mindset that development's a journey, it's not a destination. You know, so frequently when we think about development, we just default into the whole promotional, you know, role related sorts of next steps. And that's pretty limiting. And so, you know, shifting our mindset a little bit. And then also the skills. Leaders need to have some next level skills when it comes to bringing curiosity. You know, I have kind of 4 C's that came to me. Curiosity, you know, really having great questions, the ability to listen passionately and connect the dots. They need to be collaborative, because this is a partnership. Development is a partnership between the individual and the manager. They've got to be creative to be able to mine opportunities and find ways within the current landscape to be able to grow, and then have the clarity to be able to really prioritize and create a way forward that works. Because, you know, whereas Bev, you were mentioning time is an issue for managers, in some research I just did, time is the biggest impediment to development for employees as well. And so how do we have the clarity to be able to really prioritize and make sure that what people are signing up for is going to be doable and in their best interest?
So, you know, Julie, when you were talking about questions, I thought of 2 things. One is, just right now, it would be very interesting if managers sent questions to their employees before the IDP, provocative questions, great questions. And in fact, they could pull the questions right out of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, because there's hundreds of questions there. But I think if I get a great provocative question, and I might just ask the audience, we both might, 1 or 2 of them, I think it gets the employee to walk in energized, because the question is not an average question. Like, here's what, I remember being in a meeting in New York City with leadership of a financial organization. trying to sell them on career development. And the leader said, Beverly, to tell you the truth, our managers are too busy. But if you gave me one question, just one, that if every single manager asked it, we'd be doing career development. Oh, I said, oh, well, here's what came out of my mouth, and I think it's important. It's the question, what is one skill that you have that is not being used by me or this organization? One skill you'd love to use more of. If that conversation was had, I would say that's doing career development. And when I was in that meeting, I still remember we went around the circle of top leaders, and I asked them, and each of them named one thing that their organization was not using. And hint to the manager, if you can't figure out how to use that skill, collaborate with the employee or others on ideas of where that talent could be used. Because underused talent is what I think depresses people. I'm not giving my all. And shame, shame.
And one of the things that we did as we were preparing to write the book, some of the research asked employees, what do you want most from a career conversation with your boss? Blew us away that the #1 response was creative ways to use my skills and talents. Creative
Absolutely.
ways to use my skills and talents, bringing more of what I have to offer to the table.
Right.
And
Right.
you know, truly, what leader wouldn't love that? What organization wouldn't benefit from
Right.
that?
Well, and I even,
know,
oh, sorry, Beth. You
I
first.
the other great question that I love to ask sometimes, even to kick off a keynote, is, and I love to look at people's eyeballs when I ask the question, when was the last time you said, I love my work? And some eyeballs go vacant and you can see it. Some eyeballs light up and they can name it. And sometimes they can't think of a recent time if they said, I love my work. So that simple a question is great for an IDP. It's great for a career conversation. So try it, try it, try it. So let me ask you, Becky, when was the last time you said, I love my work?
Oh, I say it every day, Bev. I'm saying it in this moment. I love what I get to do.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
I pretty much do say that every day. How about you, Bev?
I love this right now because it's not scripted and we're just having a chit chat. Is much better than slides on a webinar. And so I love this moment of chatting about what we've learned over all the years we've been around. Julie, what about you?
I'm like Becky. I really do love my work. So there are very few, you know, sitting down and doing expense reports and taxes this time of year. Maybe I'll take the exception there, but I'm really grateful to do work that I love.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll invite those of you who are listening in to select all attendees and panelists and share with the group when is the last time you had that deep sense of loving the work that you're doing. I wonder, almost as a key takeaway, if that's a question we could each take with us back to our teams as a means of applying what we're hearing today. And I love seeing that, Colleen. I'm glad you love your job. So as we continue to move through, Julie, I'd love to talk a little bit about how forward-thinking organizations are approaching the IDP. And I'm also intrigued by that phrase, forward-thinking organizations, and would love to know what you mean by that. So thanks to those of you who are sharing your thoughts in the chat. It seems like a lot of you love your jobs, and I'm so glad.
Oh, isn't it lovely to be with so many people who are energized by the work that they're doing? This is fabulous. So maybe forward thinking isn't the way we want to think about it. Maybe it's, you know, organizations who are approaching it a little bit differently. Bev, you had alluded to in the beginning that a lot of many organizations are sort of following the experiment that they're doing with performance appraisals. You know, they've just decided they're not working, so we're not going to do it, and hope that leaders figure out a way to make it happen organically. And of course, you know, both with the performance appraisal and with development planning, hope is not a good strategy. Busy managers are going to struggle to do that. More organizations are breaking it up. You know, they're realizing, like in the book, we talk about kind of an apples to apples comparison. 2 hours of an intensive once a year experience could be broken up into 10 minutes every month, you know, or 5 minutes every week, can distribute it along. So you still have the accountability and you still have those touch points, and it's distributed. So it becomes more of the workflow, if you will. But some organizations are experimenting with, you know, some really different ways, sort of flipping the script and rethinking some of the unspoken rules. I think somebody said something about, you know, where is it written that managers have a monopoly on knowing this stuff and being able to do it? And it's really true. I mean, especially today, we've got huge spans of control for some leaders. We've got distributed workforces. So increasingly, leaders may not have visibility to what's going on. They might not be in the best possible position to lead the development of others. And I think there's a recognition that development really does take a village almost, with lots of different touch points and inputs. And so increasingly, as I'm working with organizations, we're looking at how can you evolve the IDP to a CDP, a collaborative development planning process, where rather than the manager and the employee being in this, you know, lonely little partnership, how do we open the door and create something more like a growth gathering, where an employee would pull together 4 or 5 individuals who could help them think through their development, who might be closer to their experience, have more different insights. And how can we work with those folks as a team to collaborate on what might be possible, how things are going to be changing, and draft some development ideas that then can go back to the manager for vetting. And so when we do this, it kind of addresses some of the things that many of you have chatted about, that, you know, how do we get the individual to own this? What are the mechanisms by which we can actually shift that responsibility? And so by shifting it into a collaborative development planning process, that's one way.
Right. You know, let me add a couple of ideas to that. You said the word Swiss Army knife, Julie, and I think the IDP can be used for many things. 4 things that I don't think we use it for is, one, and I've seen some companies do this beautifully, for recruiting. What a new recruit, a potential recruit, wants to know is, how will you grow me? And maybe a conversation about, you don't have to use the words about that, is crucial in that very first meeting. Secondly, I think it's crucial for re-recruiting. And I think we forget that once a person comes on, they need to be re-recruited. And the IDP is a great way of doing that. But 2 others, I think it is a radar for buried treasure, for the massive middle, that if great questions are asked, a great provocative ponderables are asked of everybody who goes often unnoticed, that 80% in the organization, we will find more treasure in that massive middle. And then lastly, and I think about this because of my own aging process, I think the IDP could be a way to leave your legacy. Like, I want maybe something different for the elders on my team, because they want to leave their mark in a particular way. So I love thinking about it as serving multiple functions, and those are just a few.
Those are great. Those are great. And, you know, one other thing, and things are moving so fast in the chat box, I apologize, I'm not going to capture who came up with the question. The question was, what about incorporating into IDPs or into development planning things that aren't necessarily aligned with somebody's role? And that's an interesting opportunity to evolve the planning process too, because, you know, the whole person comes to work. It's not just the work person, the worker. And so finding ways to perhaps expand the envelope of growth to include some other skills, abilities, can be a powerful way to allow for a more holistic experience of people in the workplace. And truth is, a savvy leader and employee together could probably make a connection between something that at first blush, I remember I had a client who allowed and paid for his administrative assistant to go to circus school because she wanted to learn to fly the trapeze or whatever it was. And I said, and you funded that? He said, yeah, it wasn't cheap. And I said, tell me, what was in it for you? He said, you know what? Running this office is a circus, and being able to spin multiple plates and keep multiple things going is something I need from her. And that level of engagement translated into, you know, really good outcomes for him. I'm not saying that everybody should send their people to circus school, but you know, expanding the envelope and thinking outside of just the workplace could be a way to add greater engagement and energy.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I see a cool comment here from Diane who's saying that they ask employees to include some personal goals in their IDPs each year because they want to support them in becoming their best self both inside and outside of the office.
You know, I've always said in the career work I've done that you have to put pep in your step. You have to have personal goals, you have to have professional goals, and you have to have personal goals. E was energy goals, and the P was professional. It's my cold. Personal, energy, and professional. If you have all three, it gives you pep. If you have just one, it gives you either the or the eh. So you need all three.
I love it. I love it. And just in response to Diane's note there about incorporating those personal goals, the only way that works is when development then is happening all year long. You don't have the trust, you don't have the rapport, you don't have the relationship. You haven't earned the right as a leader to ask someone to bring that to the table once a year if you're not following up, nurturing it, encouraging it throughout. So there's a responsibility embedded in expanding the envelope of the IDP to include those sorts of things too.
Certainly so. Thank you, Julie. So we do have a few more minutes together and we can take some questions. I'm acutely aware that there have been many questions mentioned in the chat that have moved past us so quickly. So if you have a question from earlier in the hour that you would like to copy and paste and bring back down to the to the end of the thread, so that we're sure to address your question if it's still outstanding, we would love to have you go ahead and do that. In the meantime, I can do some scrolling. We love the engagement with this topic. It's obvious that it's resonating with you. And so please, I invite you. I also noticed a couple of people were using the hand raise function. And if you have used the hand raise function, we would invite you instead to put your question into the chat. And I do have a question here. How do you motivate those people who feel they do not need to grow? That do not feel they need to grow?
Smack them across the face. No, I think if you don't grow, you go backwards or you go stale. But I think if you can noodle in and really get to find out more about the person, you'll find you cannot help but find the point that they go, oh, that's interesting. I think that's what we want. I think, and I'll bet you, Julie, you'd agree.
Right, absolutely. And I think sometimes people get confused about what we mean by growth. So when folks say, I don't want to grow, what it might mean is I don't want to take another job. I don't want to be transferred to another office. You know, all of those kind of traditional things
I never thought of that, right?
with regard to career. But if we can help people redefine that growth means just expanding your capacity, your ability to contribute, the network and the resources that you have to bear. If we start to kind of break it down like that, there are very few people who would say, no, I'm sorry, I don't want to learn anything. It would be a rare one.
Well, and I think when you hire people, you can set the context for the values that the organization holds. So if a value is growth and development, that's something you can address in the interview process too.
Good point.
So here's another question. What key factor or motivation can we tell employees to buy in? So something that should address the lack of time and really helping people shift away from, I don't have time, but help them be motivated to participate in IDPs. I hope I'm expressing that question well.
Understand.
Could you say that again?
If I don't understand it,
Sure.
Julie, answer it.
Yeah, so I think the question is, how do you get buy-in from managers to be willing to pursue these development conversations if they lack motivation because of lacking time? And I hope I'm translating that well.
You are.
Gotcha. So I'll take a first stab at it, Bev. I think one of the first things we have to do is really educate leaders and help them understand the benefits. When leaders understand how profoundly important this is to employees, when they understand that it's going to drive engagement all year round, when they discover that it's going to drive performance all year round, suddenly the sales job becomes a little bit easier. The other thing I think has to do with time or with training and just making them available. The training, the skills, the tools available. Because if someone, it feels like they're reinventing the wheel, they're having to make it up, that's a lot more time consuming than once you've got a process and some great questions in your hip pocket. And then the third thing is, you know, making the questions available, as Bev mentioned. You know, we've got 100 or so sprinkled throughout the book, and just having those in your hip pocket, being ready to pull them out, can change the dynamic altogether.
Right. And I just saw somebody say, how do we relieve managers of their productivity need? I think human productivity, who produces? It's humans. And how do we keep them juiced about what they do? You know, one organization I work with did something really interesting to kind of really push managers to do it. They would have a sit down, the manager and his direct reports with each one, and look at the manager's family tree. Like, who on your team in the last 2 years is still there reporting to you, who stayed in the organization, and who left completely. And based on looking at the family tree was their bonus. And I thought that was stupendous. I could not get anyone else to do it, but it was a great idea.
Hey, Becky.
Yes.
There's an interesting question from Dee. Curious about if there are any generational differences in the desire for growth and development. Can we take that one on just briefly?
I would love to. I was trying to take them in order, but I'm glad you flagged that.
Yeah, and it caught my eye just because I recently did a research study. Now, this was focused primarily on women. And so across the generational spectrum from 23 to 80, there was not a statistically significant difference in the importance of growth and development among those audiences, those subsections.
That is a huge range.
Yeah. So it's equally important across the generational spectrum. It plays out differently, and what it looks like and what people want out of it is different, but the desire to grow and learn continues across the range.
And Becky, can you read the question that Lee J just sent?
I'm looking, yes. So Lee J is fascinated by the intersection of diversity and inclusion and talent management. For example, in promotion discussions, we know the research says that men tend to be promoted on potential and women have to prove past experience. So there's a mountain of opportunities to advance the intersection of diversity and inclusion and talent management. And Lee J would love your perspective on this topic.
I think they're married. They have to be married. If I want to belong, if I want to be included, I better see what my future looks like. And if I see what my future looks like, and someone cares about my future, then I'm being developed. So I think they are inextricably connected. I don't even think I know how to pull them apart. So that's one. Julie, I'll bet you have a feeling on that too.
Well, you know, I'm looking at this question through the lens of this research I just did around women and career development. And so I'm looking at it through a very specific lens, I guess. And it is interesting to see how women's trajectories are different. One of the things that we're asking are about the self-limiting beliefs. And the number one self-limiting belief across the ages in terms of women is that bragging is unbecoming. And this, you know, the inability, the discomfort with, you know, advocating for oneself and whatnot. And so it does, and so that's just a drop in the ocean here. It does strike me that as we look at evening the playing field and making sure that our organizations and our leaderships reflect you know, the diversity of the world around us, there are opportunities to look at the places where individuals need an extra boost, need an extra bit of support, the coaching, the additional mentoring that would help get past those things that might be an impediment and kind of even the playing field a bit.
Right. And you
That's
know,
really helpful.
It's a chicken and egg thing. If I'm engaged, I feel included. If I'm included, I'm engaged. So they feed each other. And the biggest part in all my retention research for love them or lose them, the biggest piece of that research says it's about my career. It's about my growth. And people are savvy now. They know that up is not the only way, but they want to grow. And I think once we get that message out there, and it's very much a part of what Julie and I talk about in Help Them Grow.
So let's take a moment and talk about some ways that people can further their learning. So there have been some requests throughout today's event in the chat for various links to research and articles, and our team will work with Bev and Julie to get those links and include them in an email that we'll be sending out to you likely first thing tomorrow. But we have a few other learning opportunities to let you know about. Kelly, if we can take a look at the final slide. One of them is a free ebook resource that we want to give you the opportunity to download, and Kelly has just put that into the chat. So if you want to go ahead and take advantage of that link at this moment, you can download this incredible resource that Barrett Kohler helped Julie and Bev create called Ignite Development Potential, the Modern IDP. And you can download that for free by visiting the link that's in the chat. We would also encourage you to check out the book, Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go. And there's also an accompanying card deck that you can get. And now I've not seen the card deck. Julie and Bev, can you tell us just for a quick moment what that card deck is all about?
Julie, take it.
Yeah, it's a cool little tool with 45 or 50 different questions on cards and 8 or 10 different activities that you can use with those cards. So you can use them with your team, you can use them as a self-assessment, you can use them as a way to add richness to your IDP, but also keep the conversation going throughout the year.
And it looks like we have a few fans of the card deck on today's call. So thank you to those of you who are saying how much you love the deck. We also will be providing you with some information of ways to stay in touch with both Julie and Bev. And I noticed, Bev, that there's also an app available in the App Store that has those help them grow questions. And I had it downloaded to my phone at one time and just really loved the constant reminder to be asking questions of my team. So some of you may want to check that out. Bev and Julie, I'm so grateful for this chance today that we've had to talk about the IDP. I'm personally leaving inspired to think about how I can be developing my team more effectively. So for those of you on the call, if you have any takeaways that you have that you want to share with us before we end today's event, we would love to see your takeaways. What from today's call do you want to implement in your workplace? You know, what are you still thinking about, inspired by? And I want to challenge everyone to take that question that Bev said earlier about, you know, asking people in your organization, you know, what skill are we not using that you bring? Or maybe you could repeat that question, Bev.
It was, is there one skill that you feel that you have ability that you feel I've overlooked or we've overlooked your organization? Tell me more.
And Julie, do you have a favorite question that you'd like to share as we wrap the hour?
What do you want to be doing? I am all about, you know, so frequently we focus in on questions about what you want to be, what's your next step, what you want to be when you grow up. And really where we can help people grow the most is when we help activate what they want to be doing.
Great. Thanks so much. And we'll be in touch with follow-up soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Becky. Bye, Bev. Hello.
Are you, I'm here, you're there. Are we supposed to be on a different line now or just stay put?
Oh, yeah, I guess we're supposed to be on the different line. Nobody would have known you were ill. You were fabulous.
Oh,
as usual.
no, thank you. You too. You too. We're a team. So, are you gonna get off this?